Good evening, councillors, and a warm welcome to Rushcliffe Borough Council's Community Scrutiny group meeting. I would like to remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the council's control. May I remind councillors just to switch off your microphones when you've finished speaking, otherwise we'll all have green lights on and nobody will be able to hear what we're saying. Right, just to introduce the officers that we've got with us today. We've got Dave Banks at the far end on my left, Executive Director. Got Darryl Birch, Service Manager for Neighbourhoods, Derek Hayden, Community Development Manager, Paul Phillips, Environmental Sustainability Officer, Donna Dwyer, Strategic Housing Manager, and Caroline McCaffrey, Environmental Health Officer. So just going to the first item on tonight's agenda, apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Ellis, Councillor Barney, and substituting today, we have Councillor Plenter, Councillor Gordon-Wheeler and Councillor Wells.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those councillors who are substituting tonight. And I hope you find tonight's meeting enjoyable and engaging and everything, as always, the community scrutiny is. Number two, declarations of interest. Do we have any at all? No. Right, on to item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of July 2023. Any comments or items from that from anyone? Could I have a show of hands for those happy for me to sign them, please? Thank you very much. Right, just going on to the fourth item tonight is the review of the Canal and River Trust partnership funding, and I'll pass over to Derek to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So this evening is a recap presentation on the service level agreement between ourselves and the Canal and River Trust, which is an access agreement which has been in place for the last 21 years, due to expire on March 31st. The focus of the session will be to get comments and observations on the agreement post that date and the options that are available to the committees, which can be fed into the budget setting process. I'm this evening joined by Richard Irwin-Jones, who is the East Midlands Enterprise Manager, and Paul Phillips, who is our Senior Ecologist and manages the substantive service level agreement we have from an ecological and nature conservation perspective, and does a lot of the liaison between our colleagues at the Canal and Rivers Trust. So I shall pass over to Richard to run through the presentation. We've got quite a bit of detail and we'll focus on the last few slides. We'll touch upon the financial information. So I think that will be an opportunity to ask lots of questions. So what we've tried to do is to have the presentation which sets the scene, recaps for new councillors, the presentation that we gave last year, and the request to come back so that you give a further steer this year. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me here this evening. As Derek said, my name is Richard Irwin-Jones, and I'm the Enterprise Manager for the Canal and River Trust in East Midlands. And what I'm here to do, as Derek said, is to sort of give a recap on what the current agreement, the history of the current agreement that we have between Canal and River Trust and Rushcliffe Borough Council. So if I see if this works. There we go. So this is just a sort of very quick overview of us as an organisation. And this is where we cover in the East Midlands. So as you can see, extensive region. We cover all the way down from Northampton all the way up to Boston. I'm not going to go into too much details. I think you'll have seen that. So we'll get on to the detail later. So this is Rushcliffe. So this is our waterways within Rushcliffe Borough. So the main thing we're going to be talking about this evening is the Grantham Canal. we've got parts of the Trent, the Upper Trent, and the River Soar sort of dip in and out of Rushcliffe, but it's mainly the Grantham Canal that we're here to talk about. And one of the reasons for this is that the Grantham Canal is classified differently to other waterways in the region. It's known as a remainder canal, and that's because it's kind of cut off from our main network, so it doesn't connect to anything. It doesn't have active boating on it, so there's different responsibilities that we have as a charity to look after the Grantham Canal. So one of the reasons the agreement was put in place 20 years ago when we were British Waterways was to ensure, because of the nature of the Grantham Canal and the sort of level of support we gave it, it was to ensure that the residents of Rushcliffe got full access to the Grantham Canal. So it's very much it's just about kind of the towpaths and the hedges. So it's access to walk along the Grantham Canal. So that was put in place 20 years ago. Quite a bit's changed since the agreement was put in place. The biggest change is the fact that we changed from being British Waterways, which was in essence a government quango, to a charity. So we just recently celebrated our 10th anniversary. So 2012, we were set up as a charity, and as part of that, we had about sort of £45 million a year, and that was for the first 10 years that was index linked, and then it was frozen, and then it was going to be renegotiated. It has been renegotiated. Unfortunately, there has been quite a substantial cut, and we're talking about over the sort of the length of the current 5 years and the next 10 years, it amounts to something like £300 million of real cuts to our organisation. So we've got a lot of challenges coming up in the next few years. And one of those challenges locally is the fact that we timed this rather poorly, that the current agreement we have with Rushcliffe actually runs out next year. So that gives you a bit of the history. Now, what I want to talk about the sort of things that we do and how we sort of manage the Grantham Canal. Actually, before I say that, so one of the things that we're having to look at, different ways that we can bring in funding to see how we can plug that gap. And what my role is, I tend to work with statutory bodies, and these are examples of some of the current projects that we've got in place with local authorities. So, for instance, we've got two big towpath projects, one in Loughborough, which comes from the town's fund, and then in Market Harbour from Sustrans money and Section 106 agreements. They're like 900,000, 885,000. And then we've got some smaller, quite specific agreements. So, for instance, we've recently, over the last few years, been doing green social prescribing, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And one of the things that we've got in place in South Leicestershire with Blaby, Market Harbour, and Oadby and Wigston is we've just set up a 2-year project running across those three districts for green social prescribing. And then we get sort of various bits and pieces of capital money. So, for instance, we've got £150,000 from Oadby and Wigston next year for making some improvements to an area called Kilby Bridge, which is kind of the southern entrance into the waterway in Leicester. In Nottingham, we've actually got some funding from Nottingham City Council to make some repairs to the towpath where the canal wall has collapsed near the courts. So that's something we're currently looking at the moment. West North Hants, Braunston's quite a big location for us, and we're currently developing cycle access. So we're just about to do sort of detailed design to actually look at a much bigger project, which could be, in sort of size of the Loughborough and the Market Harbour project, talking like £750,000 enhancements we're doing there. I mean, locally, we have a not dissimilar agreement with the city for the sort of the main area around Castle Wharf. That's a £20,000 agreement, and a lot of that is around things like maintaining the lighting, benches, and etc. I think that runs for that's got a few more years left to run on that. We received some funding from yourselves, so your UK Shared Prosperity, for a specific reed removal project that we did was a couple of years ago. And another example is like Hickley and Bosworth. We had £10,000 of funding towards bridges. So that kind of shows you the sort of variety and breadth and how we're having to go out for support so we can actually continue doing. A lot of the things are things that we would have to find our own money for to do. So this is how we can prioritize these projects and make them happen. So what I've done is it's a mixture of things that we do, and what I was asked to do when I came, I spoke, it was about a year ago, and I talked very much about this. This is what we can do. This is all we can afford to do, and I was asked to be a bit more ambitious, say what would we want to do? What are the sort of things that we can do with the Grantham Canal? So what I've got is a mixture of that, and we'll go into a bit more detail later on. So as far as like the towpath management, this is the basic service as far as making sure the towpaths are the grass is cut, weeds are kept down, maintenance of feeders at places like Cotgrave and Smite. So that's about keeping the towpath accessible. And then we've got a lot of work around hedge management. And this is something we've been talking with Paul about how we can think about in the future. At the moment, we just do very much a basic sort of winter cut on those hedgerows. But actually, by working together a bit more closely, we can look at an actual hedge management program to enhance the environment. Mention reeds. Anyone that sort of walks on the Grantham Canal will see there's a significant issue as far as reeds. Some of that is that we haven't got boats going up and down, so that the weeds aren't kept down. We've had little bits of funding. So I think before the lockdown we had capacity, so we were able to do a little bit of work on the Grantham Canal, and then we were successful recently in actually applying for UK Shared Prosperity Fund to do a I think it was a 4-metre cut across the length through Rushcliffe. But that's all been quite sporadic, so it's opportunistic. So it isn't really managing some money. As far as operational management, we have a whole series of inspections that we have to do as an organisation around the assets. So we have people called length inspectors that walk up and down every 2 months, and they're checking the condition of our assets. We have planned repairs from our operations team, and we currently have a quite basic tree survey. So we do a biannual tree survey, and what we're doing, we're just really concentrating on anything that's overgrowing on the towpath, fallen down, etc. And we have a certain quite small budget for doing some tree work. So it's something I know we're talking about possibility of actually being a bit more sophisticated and actually doing a sort of proactive management of the trees along the Grantham Canal. What I've given examples of, so as far as wellbeing activities, we have done some wellbeing activities in Rushcliffe, which I think I've detailed in reports the last couple of years. This is an area where we are under a lot of pressure. So we're actually now looking at, we're going to have to get external funding to be able to continue these activities, which is why I gave the example in South Leicestershire, where we've got three districts all working together to be able to support our team to be able to deliver those excellent sessions for local people. And then similarly, this is another area as far as education. This is an area we're going to have to look at how we can get external funding to be able to continue this sort of work. So we do quite a bit in Rushcliffe. I know we've done a few sessions there, and when we've been able to, we've taken part in larger events like Larkin Park and things like that. But again, with the pressure in those teams to actually get those posts funded so we can continue that work. And I'm not going to dwell on this, but it's worth pointing out that all of the conversations and work that we've been doing over the years has been about access. It's not been about the actual canal. That there are some big expensive projects which we would like to do on the Granville Canal, but we really struggle to prioritise those compared with the active waterways where we've got motors and water running. So that's a kind of the breadth of some of the things that we do already, some of the things that we've been talking with Derek that there's an appetite to explore moving forward. So I can probably sort of rush through these parts unless there's any particular questions. So this kind of shows a bit of the detail of the towpath management. So what we bring in specialist contractors. So it's not like we're doing this ourselves and making extra money from it. We have dedicated contractors which we've recently renegotiated contracts for. And they do very, very specific work around. We've got protocols that they adhere to, but they are a specialist organisation because it's about working with next to water. It's about it's not like just mowing a field. It's quite complicated, and also we've got the issue of invasive work. So we've got things like giant hogweed, Japanese knotweed. These are difficult, expensive, invasive species that need to be dealt with. And similarly, Azolla, which we're actually experimenting using weevils to control that. So that's when you see the water and it's just green. So yeah, this is some very specific detail around the management, the sort of cutting protocols that we do, but I don't need to go into any more detail around that. Hedge management. So at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, we just do quite a basic hedge trim, once a year, which basically keeps the hedge cut so it's not obstructing people walking on the towpath. I think this is a real opportunity for us to think about how we can actually advance what we're doing. We do quite a lot of work with volunteers. We run hedge laying training courses. And over recent years, we've laid quite a bit of new hedge at Cotgrave. So one of the things we're thinking about is what we can do as far as that, rather than just doing a cut once a year for all the hedgerows. We can actually think about letting some areas grow more, some not so. I think what we actually looked at Lady Bay, because of it's so narrow, we would kind of have to do that on an annual basis to make sure people can access it. But areas of sort of Tolton, Cotgrave and Crotwell, we can probably look at doing that biannual. It's probably not going to have that much difference as far as the cost, because if you leave bits for 2 years, it's a lot more intense to actually cut those than if you do them every year. But what we can do is we can look at areas that we can enhance, areas where we can put new hedgerow in. And this is some of the operational work. So as I said, there's various inspections that we do, and there's a rolling programme of repairs and towpath maintenance that we do. Here's some examples of some recent work where we've repaired towpaths and repaired and painted access points. As I mentioned about tree works, so at the moment it's a biannual inspection, and we do some of the basic requirements on that. And if we get a situation where there's public safety and trees are blown down, we send out teams to remove those trees. And so a little bit more about the waterways and wellbeing. So at the moment we're doing projects in Nottingham, and we've got some healthcare funding from Nottingham, and we're also we've been talking to one of the law firms in Nottingham to actually sponsor that, so we can actually continue that in Nottingham City Centre. And the sort of things that we do, it's canoeing, paddleboarding, boat trips, walks and craft activities. So there's photography, and there's actually a bird listening walk and things like that. And what happens? It's a mixture of people actually being prescribed from their GP for either their mental health or their physical well-being, or people can actually self-prescribe and come on those. So we have done some work at Home Pierpoint, and we have had a number of Rushcliffe residents that have been benefiting from those projects. But as I said, we can only carry that on with external funding, because that's one of the areas that we're seeing that it's where funding is available. So we're going to have to prioritise other areas for sort of our existing budgets, and we've got all sorts of impact case studies if people are interested in that. Just a summary. So it's around, yeah, as I said, mental. It's mental and physical health, and I think people enjoy. We've done some isolation to inclusion projects, particularly with working closely in the meadows, and it's actually getting people out and about on water, next to water in their local area. And it's a good pathway to skills and knowledge, volunteering employments. We've had success. There's quite a good case study of somebody that came in, a lot of anxiety, couldn't work, went through the whole course, then started volunteering, and then that gave her the confidence to go off and get a job, and now she unfortunately can't volunteer as much as she was before, because she's actually now got a job working for another charity, which is great. So it shows that you can give the full program with that. And similarly, education and learning, we do quite a lot of activities around water safety is a primary one, but also engaging with the arts, crafts, water-based activities, and other areas with schools. So we go and speak in schools, and we do organised visits, and we have, where we can, also supported events. But again, that's an area where we're looking to get externally funded, so we can continue funding those posts and manage their volunteers to be able to do this. Infrastructure management. So this is quite a thorny issue around the Grantham Canals. I'm sure you're aware. It does leak. There are issues, particularly in Canalton. Some sections of the canal are dry and have been dry for many years. We have worked with, for example, the Grantham Canal Society. We've done some temporary repairs for the Grantham Canal Society. We had previously been talking with Rushcliffe around actually getting some repairs properly designed up, but unfortunately the UK Share Prosperity funding was so heavily subscribed that we weren't able to get the funding. So some of the areas I will talk a bit about reed removal programs, but there's been issues with leaking culverts, which we've done some repair work with GCS. We've got some abandoned old locks that at some point in the future that we'll need to look at the sort of public safety around those. But that with decreasing budgets, the priority often goes to the bits that are broken and need fixing to allow us to keep waterways open, and that's the increasing challenge we're having. And as with everybody, we've got a 200-year-old infrastructure that last summer it never experienced 40 degrees, so that's caused all sorts of issues for us. Thankfully, this summer was a bit wetter, so we didn't quite have the water level issues that we had last year. Just a little comment about volunteering. We get significant amounts of volunteering. We can sort of cost the value of that, and this is quite a rough estimate of some of these areas. We're talking £172,000 worth of volunteering. But volunteering comes at a cost, because we've got to actually manage that volunteering. We've got to provide equipment, we've got to provide training and management. So it isn't the answer for everything. It is something that is helping us. It's going to become crucial, more crucial in the next few years. So what I've done, sort of the nuts and bolts now, is what we've done is where we can, we've costed out what the various elements are. And what I haven't done with this, and I think we showed last year, is the kind of on costs. So I've not really included on costs as far as, you know, our ecologists are I've not included any of this. I've just looked at the actual activities. So the grass cutting contract, £22,600 for what we do at the moment. Currently, the hedge management is £11,000, and that's something we can look at how we define that moving forward. As far as the operational management, we've got various inspections, planned repairs. That comes to £1,500. It's a very, very minimal tree survey that we can do. So what I've put some, I suppose, they're kind of costs that we can look at and define if we wanted to move forward with this. So enhanced tree and hedgerow management, something like up to £10,000 annually, we could actually properly manage what we're doing as far as those hedgerows and the tree management. Put a program together. And similarly with the reeds. So when we did it, about 3 or 4 years ago, I think it cost us about £37,000 or something like that for the contractor. The last contractor was £27,000, but that's literally what can we get done. We will go right. We can cut 4 meters through the whole length. But what we can do with an actual budget and planning a budget for like 4 or 5 years, we can actually look at how we can manage those properly. We've got the area that is probably most detailed as far as the wellbeing activity, because we are doing that in other areas. So we can absolutely look at what the costs of a coordinator, the support, and all the various activities. That's what the cost for those is. And similarly with education and events. So that's a big chunk of activity, and we're talking that's over £100,000 annually, and that's not even looking at. And I've already talked about the infrastructure management. We're talking potentially big money. Where if we need to fix a culvert, could be £100,000. Lock improvements, that can be £30,000 just to secure a disused lock and make it safe. Those are some of the big numbers we have to deal with those infrastructure things. So what I've done, I've kind of slotted this into a proposed program really for discussion. So currently the way the agreement works is, and it's index linked, but it's quite a
Engineering.
That's in it. Yes, it was. Well, it shows what sort of organisation we were 20 years ago. It was a engineering linked agreement, so it has increased every year. It's around sort of about £45,000 currently. So that is index linked every year. But clearly with this sort of work, I don't think that really makes sense nowadays to have that. And you say it's an engineering link, so it didn't really make much sense. So what we're looking at is so as far as the doing what we do now. So that's the grass cutting, the existing hedge management, what we're doing with the trees, and the plan repairs and inspections. That's about £48,000 a year. That's what the actual cost of that is. If the agreement comes to a close, we're in the situation when we have to start thinking priorities, and I think those priorities are going to really ramp up in the next couple of years. I talked about the 300 million reduction. We're going to have to really look at where we can save money and where we can minimise service levels. So it's what we're doing. What's happening with a lot of the local authority funding is we've got projects. So say we've got a project that's scheduled to happen in the next couple of years. By being able to get local authority support for that kind of guarantees that stays in the programme, whereas otherwise different priorities and things get moved off. And unfortunately, what happens with something like the Grantham Canal, because of the nature of it, the priority it's always hovering around the bottom of the list. But this agreement that we've had has been able to allow us to do all this maintenance. Now we've got sort of two, packages of kind of work we could do on top. The environmental management, so that's around actually looking at a reed management program. So that's actually managing the reeds and water, and actually looking at the tree work. So at the moment, if we've got trees growing in the middle of the canal, but we don't touch those because we're just looking at the towpath. So there's issues with, and they can cost you sort of £1,000–1,500 to have removed. So we could actually then put a management program to actually look at, right, what are the areas, what do we want to actually take out to make those improvements. And similarly with the hedge management, so rather than just doing the minimum, chopping it at the moment, we can actually look at how we can increase biodiversity and manage that. So that's kind of the environmental management. And then there's the kind of the well, if we wanted to, the well-being and events. So to be able to continue those well-being activities and actually focus them, particularly I think Cotgrave would be an ideal location for those. We're looking at, cost comes out about £28,000 a year, and similarly to continue the education and events, that's £4,000 a year. So what I've tried to do is look what we're currently doing, and then it's kind of providing a shopping list of what some of the costs are pretty absolutely defined. Some of them are more, well, with this sort of amount, what can we do? Because we haven't defined in detail as far as the hedge management or the reed management, because we don't really know if there's an appetite for that yet.
And I think that the important point is, when we had the scrutiny last year, it was about what the current levels are, what we would do if we stopped. And I think if you look at the Melton section, you see that there's lots of regrowth, and it's quite a narrow towpath that's slowly filling in over time. So that the current agreement moving forward, but also there was a lot of discussion about water in the canal itself, and the reed management is obviously to improve the channel and the air and the water quality. And the enhanced tree management is, if you walk along, there's large sections where there's trees within the canal basin itself, and obviously a tree, because it's a clay-based canal, will deteriorate the canal and will lead to leaks over time. So really the enhanced environmental management was to address some of the concerns that members had raised about loss of water and egress, so that you had a scale. And obviously the environmental and wellbeing elements are added value, because there's a lot of work around green and blue social prescribing, access to being by water, and we're doing a lot of work on social prescribing in the authority as well. So we wanted to give you a menu of options that you can comment and discuss this evening, so that you have an idea of the costings of what it is now, what that does, and then what are the options moving forward. That's it, I think.
Thank you very much, Rich, for that presentation, and on all the slides, and like with this one, it's very useful for councillors. Just to reiterate for councillors, and of course with all the details, just to focus everybody's attention to the recommendations that we've been asked to consider tonight, is to receive a summary presentation, which we have, and then for 2B is to make comment on the strategic ambitions of the Canal and River Trust for any future level agreement and associated funding required for this work, which was outlined on the kind of the last slide on the kind of the 4 different options or areas, and detailing kind of how much it would kind of cost for those areas. Just you did kind of touch, so if it was just to stop, there is kind of I think that you might have just touched on it, just to double check that if it was, how it would actually look like for the whole place, it would just kind of go with where the sections just kind of react into people's minds, and that, because of course the maintained current levels is what we've got today, and and that, but then it's kind of on how it would look with the enhanced, because the enhanced environmental, with how that would look, and that's just my first question.
I suppose that if you look at the three local authorities that Grantham Canal goes through, so we've got an agreement with yourselves. We've got nothing with Melton. It's very much at the back and beyond of Melton. So you can see a real difference when you get off the Rushcliffe section. Slightly different when you get into South Stephen, because there's actually a Sustrans route. So part of the route is a Sustrans route. So there is some, I think, when it gets to Walsthorpe, from Grantham to Walsthorpe, that's a Sustrans route, and then the Sustrans route sort of goes parallel with the canal, and then it's almost like a field. So that's kind of the level of support that we're able to provide. So I'm not here to sort of make threats and like, oh, we're going to abandon it, and but it's about priority, and we're entering into a very difficult period where we're going to have to very carefully look at how and where we spend our money. And
I think it's worth pointing out, as Richard has just said, if you actually walk down the Grantham Canal and then walk into Leicestershire, you know straight away you've left Rushcliffe. It is actually noticeable, the difference, because of the management is not there once you enter into Leicestershire. So if anyone does want an example, go and have a look and you can see it for yourself.
And I think it's important to note that since the arrangements we've had in place for the last 20 years, coming up to 21 years now, it's an access agreement, because members felt it important to provide a walking and cycling access along that section. And if you've had an opportunity to read the original document in terms of the maps, and it's written from a technical engineering specification, it wasn't to work within the canal itself. It was to provide an active travel route. And it remains still an important active travel route, but as well, the council, in terms of its finances and its priorities as well, at the same time have to ensure that we're providing value for money for the residents as well. So in the financial comment, we reflect on that as well. So it's important decision to make, because our comments to make that we can feed into the budget setting process is to understand where this agreement fits within the wider council's priority list as well, and to comment on what's important to you that you wish to see, so that we can feed that into the budget setting process.
Let's open it up. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Richard, for your detailed presentation. It was very helpful. And clearly, you're doing some wonderful work out there with the Canal and Rivers Trust. I had one question, which is, you mentioned about well-being activities. Do we have some data or any stats on what was the uptake on that, in terms of how many people participated and who were the beneficiaries, and some kind of stats on it would be helpful.
We've got detailed case studies, and we and the reporting we do, particularly for the work in Nottingham. So I think we can certainly provide examples to show the sort of success we've had with those. And we're currently the agreement we're entering into in South Leicestershire. Again, monitoring is an important part of that process, and there's various techniques that are used so we can actually track participants and how their well-being improves. So yeah, we've got data, and that's actually we're able to use that data to actually bring in additional funding. So we do have reports that we can share if you wish to see that.
Is it possible to share that data at some point? Not the reams and reams, but just a succinct kind of like just how your presentation was in terms of the uptake, just for to enhance our understanding of what the uptake was.
Yeah, and I certainly. I mean, it's not my specialist area. It's not something I'm managing. I've got other colleagues that manage this, but I'm sure they'd be more than happy to come in and present in a bit more detail. And we've got example. We've got some really nice videos that we've done with participants, and actually. Not so much this time of year, but certainly when we get into the spring, we'd be more than happy for people to come out and actually see and even take part in some of those activities. We've got regular sessions easily accessible at Castle Wharf.
Just to add to that, I think probably it's important to pointing out actually that work is actually not happening in Rushcliffe at the moment. So obviously what we're focusing on at the moment is currently what the Canal River Trust are doing is just really around the access and the towpath. So any data you did receive wouldn't actually be relevant to what's happening in Rushcliffe, because that doesn't happen at the moment, which is potentially one of the options you may want to consider looking at. So yes, you could probably provide it, but it would be from a neighbouring authority, so it might not be particularly relevant to the discussion.
Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'd just like to say I do use the towpath quite a bit. I cycle along it, and I think it's a brilliant asset for Rushcliffe. I take the point that Paul says you get to a certain point where the towpath just disappears, and I take it we're in Leicestershire then, and I have managed to get right the way through to Grantham once on the bike, but if it's been a lot of rain, you can't get through. It'd be nice if we got a contribution from Melton and maybe Grantham side to make it a path right the way through, because I think that would be brilliant. Lots and lots of people use the path, dog walkers, rambler groups, lots of people on bikes. One thing I didn't notice up there, and there's quite a lot of barriers, which are brilliant, and they're quite hefty barriers, but there didn't seem to be any sort of funding for maintenance for barriers. Is that because the barriers are so strong they're going to last forever, or does that come out of a different budget?
No, that's included. In fact, if I look at some pictures, I think I've included some pictures of examples. Where are we? Yeah, there you go. So yeah, yeah, they need to be maintained. They need to be repaired and painted. Otherwise, they just go to sort of rack and ruin. So yeah, we do include that in the work and as part of the inspections as well. I mean, it's just another point linked into the social prescribing. We have done some work in Rushcliffe. We have done some activities, particularly at Home Pierpont. But what we've not been there have been some residents from Rushcliffe benefiting, but we've not had dedicated resource targeting, recruiting within Rushcliffe, because we've had the funding's been primarily city-based, but we've got some of the volunteers, actually quite a lot of the volunteers that do particularly the paddle sports are Rushcliffe-based. So that's why things have been happening in Rushcliffe.
Councillor Plant, you had your hand up.
Hello. I would like to ask a couple of questions. Can I ask them in one go? Okay. So the first question again is follow from Councillor Lopare on the well-being section. I would like to ask for what input as a councillor can have on the decision making and the broader community on the breadth and the scope of well-being activities, how prescribed or how open, how the decision making is. And to give an example, for example, I agree with the health benefit and conducive to health and to have proximity on water and the sea. I come from an island, so I know to talk about blue mines and how soothing it is, and the healing powers, the solace one can find when it has proximity to water. And I endorse that. But for some people, unfortunately, the sea and the water can be a place for trauma, because if you are a refugee and you've been traumatized. So I come from an NGO. I have supported the past, which uses tools, shared tools, to help reclaim the sea and become for all of us a place of solace. Just wonder how open you are like to connect with other charities or NGO like the Refugee Forum and broaden the scope of the well-being activities. And my second question is probably a stupid question, but I have the excuse that I'm sort of a new councillor, so I can use for a bit. I have read it. When we go to the for scenario management, so the not applicable one, does it mean that it goes back the canal to public control to Rushcliffe, or it means that we are doing nothing about it? We just and how sensitive it is, because you start your presentation by mentioning the national context. I know I'm in favor of devolution and hyperlocalism and all this stuff, but you did mention stressing how strained the budget is because of the post to 27, I think it's a 40%, and because cost of living and probably because climate change impacted your cost and stuff. How sensitized you think this matrix is on a change of local, on a change of national government, and if the funding structure, how to say, percentage of DEFRA changes? Okay, thanks.
Sorry, that's a really difficult question to answer because we just don't know yet. So the way our funding works is the DEFRA contribution is about a quarter. So we it's not the be all and end all for the money we get. So we do have some commercial activities. We have properties investment. Boaters have a contribution, and it's just been announced today. The license fees are being increased because of the pressures that we've got. So really, it's going to be, and it's not something we've yet addressed as an organisation, but we're going to have some very difficult conversations around prioritisation, because we can't continue to do the same we're doing if we've got £300 million less. It just doesn't work. So unless we can plug that gap financially, which is going to be very, very difficult, there's going to have to be prioritisation. And as you can see, with just the nature of the waterway, as far as the priority of resources, the Grantham Canal, unfortunately, it's the one we have to prioritise least, because it's not an active waterway, which is why we entered into this agreement. As far as the question the previous question you asked, that's something we do a lot. So, for instance, in Leicester, and again, it's about resources. So we've got a dedicated what we call community routes officer who works solely full time. She and it's funded by People's Postcode Lottery. She works in Leicester, and she works with refugee groups, various minority groups, and that's around getting people to comfortable, getting people to use the waterway, using their assets, and some people's relationship with water is very different to our relationship with water, and we need to understand that. That's why we have dedicated resource that works really closely with community groups. I mean, that's a post that's funded in Leicester. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources to do that level of engagement in Nottingham. We did do a recent isolation to inclusion project, and a lot of that was we had a dedicated officer, and we could actually do community-led activities. So actually consulting with the communities and developing those activities that they want to do. But at the moment, with the social prescribing, we've been running it for a couple of years now. We've kind of seen what works and what works in different areas. So we're trying to sort of roll out packages of activity. So and we can cost those up as far as things, very specific things like paddle boarding and canoeing and walking and cycling and that sort of thing. Hopefully that answers your question.
Just to add, that's why, because obviously this agreement that we currently scrutinising looks at the Grantham Canal, but there are three major waterways in terms of the Soar, the Trent, and the Grantham Canal, and that's why we included that small section in terms of education and events, and that's about water safety, going into schools, ensuring that we at least addressed in terms of this choice space, looking at those options. At least we recognise that is a programme that the Canal and Rivers Trust deliver, and that could be something that if members were so minded that we could explore, including in a future SLA if that was so minded.
I just wanted, with you mentioned about the well-being and activities, kind of with that kind of figure, and you given examples of what's happened in the city where there is water to do stuff on. What would you envisage kind of those looking on, like being utilised on the Grantham Canal, where some sections there isn't as much water or anything like that? Kind of what could be used with Grantham, with the canal through Rushcliffe and that type of thing?
Some of that is as far we have done activities at Home Pipon, and there are sections of the Grantham Canal where we can do those. And for instance, just off the Grantham with Hazelford Locks, where we've been doing a Wellman group, and actually there's quite a few Rushcliffe participants in that. So that's on the trend, and it's a large sort of lock island which is being maintained by volunteers, but that's very much on a sort of health and well-being basis. So it could be, there are certain locations where we can do the work, and also we do a lot of things we do. It's not just water based. It's things like photography, cycling, running, all those craft activities as well. So
just probably a question for the officers is there any kind of other sources that could assist with well-being projects to kind of link in and utilize the space that we have on the Grantham Canal, like with social prescribing, reach and such like? And my other question is then just around the reed management, where there was a project where it was about 27k specifically. Was that a specific area that was 27k, or was it the whole? I say the whole section because it's not all of it. But then where you've put about 20k annually, would that kind of be a rolling annual projects of doing a section 1 year and then kind of another area, or is it kind of then would be spread out, like kind of not if it's targeted?
What that would be, so as I mentioned, it was we just there was a need raised by the public and council, so we applied for a pot of funding, and it was literally how much can we get for this this amount of money, and it was like a 4 meter wide, and we very much specified the exact sections as a sort of a one-off, but obviously they grow back and they proliferate, and there's issues. I know there's quite a lot of volunteer work being done in Lady Bay as far as reed management. One of the issues in Lady Bay is actually what you do with the reeds. So when you're more in the more rural areas, you just put them on the side and they'll rot down, but you can't really do that in the more built up areas. But it's around actually doing a management program, putting a management program in place. So rather than just doing ad hoc, going through and putting strips in, that would be the proposal. But it's not a detailed figure at this stage because it's something we'd need to carefully define. But we could do that with contracts and look at how we actually do a rolling program and properly manage it over a number of years.
With the 27,000, it was it was last year actually, 2022. We paid for, and the Canal River Trust undertook a series of reed clearances. It was a 4 meter wide stretch done in Knowlton, Hickling, Cockgrave, Gamston and Lady Bay. So it was a significant area of the canal was done. We also did quite a bit of publicity around it at the time, and there was a lot of very positive comments from the public about the work once it was done. So that was what we spent that 27. As I said, it was a one-off treatment of those particular areas.
And just to address your point on, there are, so we have, if we were to look at, say, we would look to fund wellbeing activities through other sources or other means or other grant opportunities. We have the Reach Rushcliffe Fund, and we do work with Green and Blue, our social prescriber teams at the PCN, but there is a small Rushcliffe Reach fund. We usually use that to prime social isolation and projects really to the value of about £2,000. So you can see this is far more significant than that, and it gives a typical program. I think what we try to do is to give members a very broad menu of things that the Canal and Rivers Trust do outside, because there was a lot of feedback about the water retention and the canal itself. In addition, and the agreement that we've had for the last 21 years has been about the towpath and access. So as you can see, it's an expensive program of works, and there's things that are below the line as well. So I think it's just to give you a flavour across the piece of what could be done. I'm not saying everything.
Well, actually, Councillor Williams has said most of what I wanted to say, but I think in terms of when I read the report, I have to say that probably the first time I've read that report, but I was quite surprised that the service level agreement doesn't actually cover water, because it is nice to have water in the canal as well. And I was really pleased with the work that's been done in Lady Bay, because I, and obviously Richard, and certainly spent a good few weekends hauling those out to not a lot of avail in the past, but it makes such a difference. And I think that in terms of, well, you've sort of mentioned, obviously there must be a plan. There's certain parts of the canal that do need more regular upkeep in terms of keeping those reeds down or whatever. And it's sort of, would that be sort of the cost of, is that included in that, was it now 20,000 cost or whatever on a regular basis, and you would just cover certain areas when the need was there? No.
That would be an actual reed management program to actually look to rather than a strategic approach, rather than just sort of tactical that we've done where we've had a bit of, because at the moment if we had a bit of money, we've removed what we could within the funding that we've got. So it's actually, that would be, defining a management program to actually keep those reeds managed throughout the year. Yeah. Yeah. And of course they grow back. Yeah.
Again, Councillor Williams mentioned about other funding for, obviously the social prescribing is a really important arena, and obviously people get a great deal from it. And with more and more houses being built in Rushcliffe, it's really important to have these spaces for people to actually go to and obviously improve their well-being. So is the money for that available elsewhere? I mean, you've mentioned something, Derek, but I'm not quite.
Yeah, so the Borough Council, in terms of the Borough Council's funding, the Borough Council's funding, we have a small annual pot of money which is due to end this year for a project to end loneliness and social isolation called Reach Rushcliffe. That has a £15,000 annual pot. And what that has done, there's a range of projects throughout the borough, which it's aimed to reduce tackle loneliness and isolation. For example, we've recently funded a project in Rushcliffe Country Park for dementia friends sessions, where carers have been coming along. We've funded eco farms. We've funded small projects. Now, we could do a project for £2,000 with the Canal and Rivers Trust, but I think what this is about what Richard is done to show you what they have done in South Leicestershire as a more concentrated programme. So it's about having that idea of what can be done. So there's no defined funding. We would have to bid for funding around infrastructure with our health colleagues if we were to try and I don't have any defined funds that I would bid for at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So I think perhaps just to try and sort of sum this up, really, I think tonight really we wanted to hear your views and observations about the various packages that we've got there. So we've got the end agreement package, which is where the council would make a saving. So that would be a 45k saving on the existing budget. And of course, let's not forget the council is under our own financial and cost pressures in the same way that the Canal and Rivers Trust are as well. So it's important to bear that in mind. We've got maintain current levels, which is basically let's keep doing what we're doing and supporting the Canal and River Trust to make sure that that canal towpath is as accessible and probably more accessible than what we see in Melton. We've got the enhanced environmental management arrangements there, which is clearly above and beyond what we're paying at the moment. So that will be a significant financial pressure on the council. And then we've got, if you like, the gold standard, which is the enhanced environmental wellbeing and events, which is a much deeper, much more strategic project, which clearly has a lot of different positive deliverables, but is more than double what we're paying at the moment. So what we want to do tonight is really get a clear steer from you. Which package would you want the council to support so we can take that into the budget workshops?
Councillor Pretman, because I've got a list of councillors who put their hand up.
This is a question for Derek. You know, in terms of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, is that guaranteed every year?
No, it's a 3-year project which funding ends next year in year 3, and then it'll form part of the combined authority arrangements. So it was UK Shared Prosperity funding, more commonly known as levelling up funding, that's come from government to the local authorities as a 3-year programme, which ends next year.
And the second one was about education and events, where the costings is £4,000. Do we have anybody else currently in Rushcliffe delivering that?
No, not that I'm aware of. We don't have any water safety education programs that are currently active within the local authority area.
And as far as our role is concerned, could we look into about maintaining current levels and then probably add one of the things from the other things that have been suggested?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think this is to try and get a steer, because you can break these down into 3 key areas. It's about ecology, biodiversity, about access and active travel, and protection of the canal in terms of water and the heritage asset that it is. Then the educational and environment one, or educational and activities, is an additional element to that. So there are really 4 really key distinct deliverables from this arrangement. The one that we cover within the existing arrangement, and I've got to be clear, is about access and active travel opportunities. It doesn't cover any other aspects. So if members are keen, we're either going to have to cut the access. If you're keen to, but we are financially, we're going to be able to exist at existing levels, we would have to reduce that to fund other elements. So whilst this is, Richard has been very kind to produce a level of costing, so we've got an idea of that, we will have to cut our cloth accordingly for whatever finances that we can come. But we just really wanted to get a sense of what are the really important priorities for the Grantham Canal itself and the wider projects in the borough.
Thank you.
Councillor Manager, you have your hand up next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the meeting. And apologies for the late arrival. I still had my reminder set for the original 7 o'clock start, so I thought I was getting here a bit earlier, and I wasn't. Yeah, lots of interesting stuff, lots of really good work in the reports, good as well. I'm one of the councillors for Lady Bay. I'm a proud owner of a fairly new set of waders recently, and there's an awful lot of volunteer work being done along the Lady Bay and the section up into Gamston as well. Huge amount of reed clearance that's being done on a pretty much a weekly basis, especially now, once we're outside of the bird breeding season as well, making a real impact in clearing
a channel down the centre, not just removing the reeds, but also the act of doing that is taking up a lot of the silt and stirring up the silt and sort of getting that sort of deeper channel that a lot of people are really keen on for the preservation of the amount of water that's in that section as well. I have to say there's also something we're coming across a fair amount of dumped rubble in these places, and even the best waders are not going to protect you if you come across shards of glass that are as big as the laptops that you've got in front of you here, which I have done unfortunately a few times, but fortunately without injury. That said, I'm happy with the work that's been done on the towpath side of things so far, and the maintenance of the hedges as well. I've attended some events down in Hickling over the last few years. Me and wife, Councillor Sue Malander, have on each occasion cycled there alongside along the towpath. It's pretty good condition outside, out to Cotgrave and beyond and up over the top, over the A46. There are places where it's quite narrow and could probably do with a bit more TLC. And nobody on a bike likes those barriers where you have to get off, haul your bike round, because it's virtually impossible to get them around any other way, which is a problem, you know, an inconvenience if you're on a bike. It's an impossibility for anyone on a powered wheelchair or any other kind of accessibility, or a motor scooter or anything like that. So that there is an issue of accessibility for people with disabilities that I think probably needs to be addressed for many parts of the canal. Moving further along there are still some areas there that I think the hedge management needs a bit more looking at as well. I took some secateurs in my pocket the last time I cycled along there, because briars and brambles grow quite fast, and if they're at eye height, it's not much fun coming across them. So there is some scope for additional hedge work there, certainly, in my opinion. Repairs and inspections, is that talking about the canal, or is that talking about the towpath? I wasn't quite clear on that, or is it both? So that's just one thing on that. Moving, that's yeah. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, that's the towpath. That's not
that bit's the towpath. Yeah, if it was, you wouldn't get any. You'd be barely plugging 100 meter stretch if it was the. I did think of that. In terms of the water, because this is a very, very hot issue in the Hickling area and in the Lady Bay, Gamston, West Bridgeford as a whole area, and other areas as well. There is great enthusiasm for the people living in those areas to keep those areas in water and to improve the water retention within those stretches as well. There are leaks there. There are problems where maybe the clay has given way somewhere, maybe some tree roots have grown through. But either way, there are issues with that. And where it stilts up progressively over years, it ceases to be in water. And that's something that certainly folks in Lady Bay and, you know, Abbey, Camster wards, and all the other ones bordering the canal, people are very, very keen to have an active role for the CRT in keeping the canal in water. And that is a real clear steer that we're getting from our residents right the way along the length of it. So from my point of view, I would be looking at the enhanced package for this. It's something that there is a clear appetite for. There is a tremendous amount of voluntary work being done. That's very, very laudable. There is a lot of fundraising being done as well. Mention was made of the removal of reeds. That's actually turning out to be one of the more expensive bits. You say out in the countryside, you can just put the reeds on the side or you can dispose them. But in the urban areas, where do you put them? There's a limit to the amount that you can pile on the sides, and disposal of those can turn out to be quite expensive. So, you know, with the fundraising that's being done, I think that's good and that's helping. But certainly, I would like to see the enhanced package and work with education along the canal as well. It's a tremendous asset. There are loads of people who are interested in wildlife and preserving that. There's a role for schools to get involved a lot more than they are doing as well. There are angling groups who want to get involved. So I think it's a fantastic asset that the Rushcliffe has got. I think we are making good use of it, but we could make a lot better use of it. And from my view and the view of residents of, as I say, many of the areas along the canal, I think the enhanced package would definitely be the one that would get most acceptance. Thank you.
I just wanted to answer that question about accessibility. That's very important to us, and as far as strategically, I'll give you an example of Loughborough. So we've recently refurbished a couple of kilometre stretch in Loughborough, and we have, with the funding to do that resurfacing, we've removed those barriers that you speak of, and it's not without controversy. You get some people aren't happy, and you will get people misusing towpath, particularly with the electric scooters and things like that. But we were doing an inspection a few weeks ago, and there was a lady in a mobility scooter, and she rushed over to us, and she was so thankful because now she could go the whole stretch in her on her scooter, and not getting to those, like you say, those barriers that you can kind of get a bike round. But so that is something that could be looked at. But with everything that you can't just take them out. That it's quite a complicated job, and you have to resurface and things like that. So there is a cost to those, and also a certain amount of consultation in some cases, because they can lead to there are massive benefits, but then there are some real risks.
Just to point out that what is being proposed within that programme there will only have a minor effect on retaining water. There will be some improvements, as I said, with the reed management, but if you can just go back to the previous slides just for a second. If you really want to really address the water, you'd have to actually be doing culvert repairs, which is £100,000 per culvert. So what we're looking at there will only have a minor impact on retaining water on the canal.
Right, just I think going to the last count, just because of also being conscious of the other items on our agenda and to give them adequate scrutiny, going to go to Councillor Billing, and then we'll kind of look at the recommendations and get a bit more of a steer on these options. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As a canal user of Oldham, I used to have a narrowboat down in sort of the London area, and I'm a canoeist. The benefits of being by the canal, on the canal, are fantastic. When I've been looking through, obviously, all the figures, and the enhanced package is £30,000 more than the level with today's prices to stay where we are. I think it would be a retrograde step for us not to go for that, because with the focus of biodiversity, net gain, and, as you say, access to blue and green areas for well-being and mental health, it's a very small price to pay to give our residents that access. It's easy when we look at those figures to go, oh, £78,000. It's 30,000 uplift, and I know that will give an issue, but given the reserves we do have, I think it's an affordable lift for the benefit we will get as a whole. So I would urge us to at least recommend the first level of enhancement.
Is there any other council wanting to expect on those kind of those levels? But just giving a steer, we've kind of been looked at with the council third one on that. Did you want to? Yes, on those now rather than the.
I suppose it was framed in rather reductionist way. They say we can save 48K if we end the agreement. So it was, I think, I felt like it was very reductionist, monetarizing everything, but I don't think we can monetize everything. As I said before, anyway, the financial context in which we base our decision is quite fluid, because unfortunately, although we would like to dream of a devolved, autonomous local government, we are very much dependent on the national context. And at the time being, of course, we have a reduction on the DEFRA grant by 40%, and the current administrators are very, very keen on the CRT find their own funding and private avenues of funding. And of course, this cost of living and all these parameters. but I think we have to take into account that we cannot, that this can change, but as well we cannot reduce every decision in profit loss in the bottom line. And we have to think as well the Environmental Improvement Plan and Clean Air Act and our obligations for every citizen to be within 15 minutes of a distance to a blue and green zone. This is an obligation we have for the well-being. It's an obligation we have as well. For everybody to have, because local government is conducive to everybody's well-being and mental health. And this is of paramount important, these public spaces of green and blue oases within an urban concrete environment. So we have to take that into account. We have to take into account as well the biodiversity net gain, the wildlife, connected disparate habitats, the fact that people in urban environments get to see plants, animals that they won't see otherwise. We have to honor what happened 50 years ago. I saw it was in your slide in the Transportation Act and the inspiration to build these urban oases. And we should realize the centrality on waterways to enforce, to strive for sustainable ecocities. And if we see it from that perspective, I think we should definitely go from the enhanced plan.
Option 3, 78,000, please.
So just to, so I think kind of very much from what I'm gathering in the room, not to end the agreement, just going kind of that, and to at least maintain the current levels, but then kind of looking around for where it can be fitted in to go to the budget workshops is around the enhanced environmental management, and how that kind of with detail would look, because of the reed management being a kind of, as I think it's been stated, a ballpark figure of 20, and the same with the enhanced trees and hedge management. So it's just kind of getting a bit of a idea on those, and how much that would be. And just to remind councillors as well, this wouldn't be another 20-year agreement. As stated in 1.2 on our report, it will be kind of looking around a 5-year agreement. So just kind of to have that in mind as well for councillors, of how long this would be. So so if everybody's kind of happy with that summary of what kind of heard from tonight's scrutiny of this, and officers are content with what's been said and around the scrutiny of this, I think we'll look to the next item of the agenda. That's okay.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not clear. We've not voted on this. We've got 4 options here. Surely we should be having at least a show of hands on each of those options.
All the options go to the budget workshop. Budget workshop will be looking for options from us.
Yeah.
To formulate their decisions.
So they should have a very clear steer.
Single item out in isolation may not be a good idea.
Yeah.
The recommendation isn't actually that we need to have a vote for it. I mean, obviously the options have been presented. I think, as the chair was saying, there's clearly the feeling in the room certainly is potentially that people want to go to the enhanced
environmental.
Yeah, I mean, if you decide you want to have a vote, then that is entirely up to you. But the recommendation isn't a vote; it is just a feedback, sort of your views, having scrutinised the process.
I just thought, given that we've got a clear number of options here, if we have a simple show of hands, nobody voted for getting rid of it, X voted for this, X voted for Y voted for that, you whatever voted for something else. That would be a useful indicative feedback, I thought.
Right, just. Yeah, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming and presenting on this issue. You're welcome to stay for the rest of it if you really want to, or you can now leave. Right. Going on to item 5, social housing models. I pass over to Donna Dwyer.
Thank you, Chair. So I thought it might be useful just to provide a few of the key highlights from the report, and then open it up to questions to the group. So the report sets out the Council's approved policy and operational framework for provision of affordable housing, the different delivery models and the current approach to meet housing need. The recommendation of the report is to review the Council's current approach to the provision of social housing, and that's to ensure that we're maximising affordable housing options and ensuring best use of the capital budget. And I think it's probably useful just to have a quick recap on the definition of affordable housing. I'm not going to give you the formal definition, I'm going to give you a simplified version. So schemes that come under affordable housing are affordable housing for rent, that's social housing. Traditionally you would know that as the old style council housing or registered provider housing. Need and the formula for the rent is set by central government. So the social rented housing and then affordable rented housing. Affordable rented housing is similar, a little bit less secure, but a higher rent, although it's still considered to be affordable. So that rent is usually charged. I think probably straight away you can understand that with Rushcliffe, with rent levels, 80% of market rent still pegs that quite high. So that's the affordable housing for rent. Then there's also affordable housing for sale, which comes under the affordable housing definition, and that's discounted market housing. Some of you may have heard of first homes, where that discounts the property by 30%. There's other routes to home ownership. That's sort of a catch-all. It's what most of you will probably be aware of is shared ownership, part rent, part buy, rent to buy initiatives. And then we've got starter homes, which was back in 2006. I think that's quite old. You don't see so much of that again. That's sold at a discount. So that's really affordable housing when I'm making reference to that in the report. So in terms of the report, the first section covers background and context, and that provides an overview of stock transfer to what is now Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, and that was back in 2003, and they're still our largest registered provider in the borough. But in recent years, obviously with our growth targets, we have seen more and more registered providers coming in the borough, and we've now got between about 14 or 16 different registered providers with different stock holding numbers. So the council is still responsible for managing the allocation of households to affordable social rented housing, and you see that through the housing register. And we do that via nomination rights, and those nomination rights are normally secured by planning agreements and nomination agreements that we have with the registered providers. You'll all be aware, but I'll state the obvious. The council currently owns no housing stock and no longer runs a housing revenue account. And when I further go on and make reference to HRA, it is the housing revenue account. So the vast majority of council house development and acquisition is normally provided by local authorities with existing HRA housing stock. And the current regulation allows councils to own up to 200 dwellings without the need of a housing revenue account. And that's important to understand for stock transfer authorities like ourselves. So the report provides a bit more detail into the usual factors to support a council house build programme. And some of those factors will be where there's exceptional housing need, registered provider delivery is limited. We've got 14 to 16 registered providers operating in the borough now. The council has land assets, of which unfortunately we don't. Or the council wishes to develop bespoke housing, or the council has funds to invest in housing, affordable housing, and we do have funds, which I'll go on to explain. There are, of course, some further considerations when assessing a council house building programme. And some of these are, I suppose, related to financial aspects, and that is about, well, if you're a stock transfer authority, who's going to do the management maintenance of those properties? Council-owned companies will require formal registration as a registered provider, a board constituency, constitution rather. So it's quite onerous in terms of the process that's required to set up a council house build programme. When you've got a council house build programme, if it's the council that's the landlord, it does also affect the tenure. So tenancies would therefore be secure tenancies, which do provide a lot of security, but the risk with that is that they're subject to right to buy. So you could have a situation where you've got a council housing company, you've invested, and then further down the line, a lot of the stock goes to right to buy. And of course, that's the intention to benefit, but that's not given a long-term rental revenue to the council, if that's a consideration for setting up the company. So we do have, as I mentioned, a capital budget of 4.5 million, which is probably an unusual position for most councils. The majority of that has come by way of a commuted sum from some of our larger sites, one of the largest sites. And the report highlights actually some of the challenges in actually allocating the 4.5 million. It's actually quite difficult to spend that. And despite good relationships with a lot of our registered providers and regular meetings with developers, it can be quite difficult to spend that money because a lot of it relies on having the land available. And you'll see that that's a key consideration in terms of what options we progress for the provision of affordable housing. So what do we do? So the main opportunity we have to allocate our funds is through the work of our registered provider partners in identifying and acquiring sites either on the open market or where they've got their own land assets. And then we provide the grant funding to enable affordable housing. I'll give you an example of that. So Metropolitan Housing, a lot of the garage sites, for many, many years, we've worked with them, we've grant funded, and we've provided predominantly social rented housing on garage sites that would have otherwise been disused or subject to ASB. So that's been a very successful programme. So that's where we can make a difference with our grant funding, where we haven't got a land asset, but we can utilise a registered provider who has that. So that approach was, there's been a raft of similar reports to this that has gone before us, and that approach that we take in terms of using our grant funding for registered providers and occasionally developers was approved by Cabinet on the 12th of October 21. So I think, again, the important point to draw out here is without controlling the land, having land assets, all of the options that are set out in the report are dependent on the cooperation of third parties who have access to land or developers who plan to deliver land in the borough through your normal planning gain, section 106. And then we'll try to negotiate where we can get additionality, additional affordable housing over our policy position. So the report also touches on housing needs, and the latest housing needs assessment was put together in 2022 by external consultants, and that is required as part of the local plan process. We do need an evidence base to support the emerging local plan. And that housing needs assessment indicates an annual net unmet need for 294 affordable rented dwellings per year. So not the affordable home ownership products I mentioned earlier, it's the rented. So that could either be your social rented or your affordable rented housing. The report sets out in table 1 the affordable housing completions, and from that we certainly have, in terms of future projections, got a healthy pipeline of affordable housing, and that by and large is due to our growth targets and some of the big sites coming forward. Table 2 shows housing completions and affordable housing built, and I do have to apologise, the original report did have an error on the Rushcliffe new completions, and that has since been amended. So that has been in the last day. So if you have a report in front of you that you printed off a few days ago, it might have a different figure. So the Rushcliffe percentage of affordable housing as a percentage of the new completions during the 5-year period is 25% and not 38% as previously indicated. Do apologise about that. Table 3 shows the housing register numbers, and you might wonder there why there's a difference in how many people we've got on the housing register compared to some other authorities. Ours are around 600, some are in the thousands. That's because we have a closed list, so you have to have a housing need before you can go onto our list to be considered for housing. Some authorities operate open registers where anybody can go on the housing register. But we as an authority made a decision that we would target and prioritise our affordable housing to those with the greatest need. So that section is about housing needs. We then move on to a further section about specialist housing needs. And that can encompass any vulnerable group, care leavers, domestic abuse, refugee, it can be rough sleepers, for example, people with mental health issues, people who require support with the accommodation. But it also stretches as far as adapted housing. You'll be familiar with the fact that, unfortunately, because of the demand for adaptations, we've got huge pressure on the DFG budget, and the affordable housing budget has helped with providing additional funding for that. But again, I think the point to make here in terms of specialist housing need, it's not just in the gift of ourselves and having the £4.5 million to develop housing. That's the capital funding side. You have to identify the revenue funding, which provides the support officers, the people who are actually in the hostels that will help provide that support. So it's really important to understand that there's two parts to that equation, and we can't do one without the other. So the provision of supported housing requires both capital and revenue funding, and we only have the capital. Of course, on the revenue funding side, Nottinghamshire County Council play a very important part in commissioning housing services for the vulnerable groups I've just mentioned. And so what you'll find is a lot of the supported housing is that's been commissioned by the county, because they've got their own budgets and they will allocate that. So if we ever have anybody approach us to discuss supported housing, we will always look at it as a whole, but we'll be very clear about, yes, we're willing to look at that if the evidence supports us using our capital programme for the bricks and mortar, so to speak. But there has to be conversations with the county council in terms of that revenue funding to enable that to go ahead. So I think that's an important point about bringing forward specialist supported accommodation. And then finally, the report highlights risks and financial implications, and with the commuted sums that we have, which partly make up the 4.5 million. There'll be time limits on the allocation of commuted sums. If they're not allocated within the time limit, and some of that can be for a longer period of time, 10 years or so, then the developer can at the end of that request that funding back if that's not been spent. So it's important that we do keep a close eye on those time limits, and particularly because when we're talking to our partners, development takes a long time to bring forward. So we are currently looking at 2 schemes in Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, which we've been looking at for 18 months, which would use a significant proportion of the 4.5 million if that comes forward. And it's progressed to a stage where we've been looking at drawings, and I've got some pre-app advice on that. So there are discussions ongoing, but things don't happen overnight. So when we're looking at commuted sums, time deadlines, we have to sort of be working back a couple of years to make sure that we've got plans to spend that money. And the final comment really on the financial implications is really just setting out some of those prohibitive costs of setting up a council housing build programme. And I think I've already mentioned when that is probably lends itself to be more beneficial in terms of washing its face for the resources that are put in. It's where there's land assets that can go into that to sort of balance that out, and we don't have those, I'm afraid. So that hopefully is whistle-stop tour of the report and highlighting some of those key areas, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Donna, for that presentation. We'll open it up to the floor for questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Donna. I found that really interesting. I've learned a lot of things reading this report. But if you look at table 2, and this is still what gets me in terms of this, like it's like an umbrella term for affordable housing. And if you break down that number for Rushcliffe, 864, it's said affordable homes, built, social rent, affordable rent, intermediate rent. I mean, there's huge differences in an affordable rented property and a social rented property in terms of price. And that's really the issue. I mean, you list at 420, well, one of the issues, 421, all the issues that have, the problems that obviously are rising, not just in Rushcliffe, but across the country. But we still can't get, I'm just trying to get to how many houses there are actually in Rushcliffe for social rent that people can actually access. And from that figure, it's given me an umbrella. Oh, these are there, but the actual number of social houses that would be, built, not because they're out. I know they're out in the house. I can't get that from that number. Do you see what I'm getting at?
So I've not got the exact number, but there'd be around 4,000, 4,500.
No, sorry, I misled you. I mean, just from that figure there, how many of those would actually be social housing, just that people can actually rent at a social rent?
I can't give you an exact number, but I can tell you how we sort of negotiate. So if you've got a site that's delivering 30% affordable housing, 60% of the 30% will be rented, and then the remainder will be affordable, the intermediate products, the shared ownership, part rent, part buy. So out of any site that's coming forward, if we get the full 30%, and it's not always the case because of viability issues for one thing or another, then our policy position has got that split in. And the split for the rented housing, it's further split into social rent and affordable rent. How will we derive those figures? Well, they came from the housing needs assessment and the model that we use that inputs data from the housing register, which is called backlog need, as well as looking at future census information. So the split that we use is evidence-based. But if you asked me, I would say, well, yes, the housing register, we've got 600 people on. I would like 30% affordable social rented housing because that's the lowest rent. But it is important as an authority, we try to meet the needs of different groups. So we have to make sure it's not just those off the housing register. We are providing starter homes, discount homes to enable people to get on the ladder. So the 864, if you work on the basis that when sites come forward, quite a significant proportion is the shared ownership type as well as the rented units. And yes, we do have issues about affordable rent, as I mentioned at the start, about that being 80% affordable rent, open market rent, which makes it very costly. So what we're now doing is on the Section 106 agreements, when we sign up, we ensure that the affordable rent is capped to the local housing allowance levels, LHA levels. So that means that if the 80% affordable rent is higher than the LHA level, which is determined for what benefits you are paid, that it's capped at that level. And that means people don't have a shortfall then when they're in the rented accommodation. I hope that sounds, although I wasn't able to give you a specific figure, I hope that's given you some idea in terms of percentages on rented and shared ownership properties that are delivered.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you. Today's calculators to my left. We think we've calculated it at 518 that would fall within, if you took 60% of that 864, 518 would fall into the social rent or affordable rent figures.
Councillor Bing, did you have your hand to ask?
I did start off with a large list of questions, but I have to say that Donna has actually written to myself and Councillor Thomas, in answer of some of those. So you'll be relieved on that. Ring-fenced funds of 4.5 million, is it? I'm trying to get my head around how we use that and what we can leverage from that. Because obviously when a developer comes forward and says they want to build X number of houses out, and yes, I get that we have to provide housing for every type of house need, or home need, I should say, rather than housing. And it's probably a question for here and for planning, actually, because when those plans come forward, so many times I hear, I don't know, it's probably just hearsay, that X number of affordable houses were put in and it was knocked back to this because the developer says, well, if we don't build that many, it's not affordable for us. But surely some of the money we've got, that 4.5 million, isn't that to assist them to actually meet that target, aspirational target of affordable homes, so they can't push back on and say, well, it's not affordable. So we kind of make it affordable for them. Is that actually the case? Are we actually doing that now?
Yes, so if there's a viability on any site, then yes, we will identify what that shortfall is, and we will enter discussions for using the 4.5 million to make that up. So if it'll only deliver 20% and the policy position is 30%, but they're saying it's not viable, then we do get independent consultants in to check the viability first and foremost, but we will use that money. It doesn't always work out best value for them what you're actually having to pay per unit to make it up to the policy position. So that has to be a consideration in terms of what grant we're having to put in per unit. But it's absolutely a consideration because of the issue I talked about with not having land. So we need to utilise the land when it becomes available through planning gain. 4.5 million won't deliver a lot of units. It seems like a big sum of money, but it won't. But I can absolutely assure you, we do have those conversations.
I'll keep it really short, and I won't ask some of the questions because it's the it was referring back to 4.14. So I'm going to remind myself exactly what that was because I did this late last night. I'm very sorry. Yeah, we're working with partners in identifying and acquiring sites. Are we? It's basically around about number of social houses. From where developers want to allocate a certain number, or on a feasibility basis, are our interventions increasing the numbers as a general output? If that makes sense. Does that make sense? So if we just said if the developer comes along and says, yeah, we're meeting your 20% or whatever we want for that particular area, are we having a net benefit to the outcome on social housing by intervening? Does that make sense?
Sorry, I don't understand the question in terms of the net benefit.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, if I can comment. So I think from what you're saying is you want to understand the work that we do when we get a planning application in, and a developer is claiming a viability issue and saying actually can only deliver say 20%. The conversations that Donna's just described and the detailed work she does, the independent evaluation of the affordable housing, generally secures an increase in most cases in those sites, which then results in the benefits you see in table 2 in terms of the additional numbers and the overall benefit that you're seeing in the borough.
Thank you.
Councillor Matt, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wonder if you might want to go to Councillor Plenter first because you seem to have a question specifically about that issue. Oh, right, okay, sorry, I thought I did. Sorry, I was wondering about the use of that ring-fence money as well. And okay, that's about, we've been sort of talking about increasing the numbers of the houses, but I wondered, there's a bit in 4.23 about specialist housing needs, and they're saying there's significant pressures on the disability facilities service and budget, and we've got like an aging population as well that need a lot more assistance and sort of adaptations made to houses as well. So, is there a possibility of using some of that money not just to increase the numbers, but increase the facilities and improve the kind of housing that we've got, so that more, it says at least one should comply with the particular building regs around adapted and adaptable housing? Is there a scope for using some of that money to increase that percentage so that we're enabling people to stay in their homes for longer rather than have to move to particular specialised, but rather than chasing a smaller pool of adapted houses?
So on the new build, yes, where it's not specified within a policy position about delivering adapted housing, again, we will have that conversation and identify that we do have a capital programme, and we're more than happy to provide additional funding where they can provide adapted housing, and that takes the pressures off of our DFG budget. So more recently, some of the changes that we've made is any older persons accommodation coming through, we ensure they have level access showers in and not baths, because we have found historically where we've provided that and the baths, they're then being ripped out more or less immediately. So moving forward, we're making sure that we have that in, but where we've got a lot of historic agreements that haven't set that out, of course, the developer will say, well, we're not providing that because it's not been specified. So that's where we'll say, well, yes, well, we'll utilise, if there's any overcosts on that, then we'll offset that with our own capital funds. So we do look to use that where we can.
I'm really pleased to hear that. I'm going to say, speaking from personal family experience, having sort of the non-slip wet rooms and showers is an awful lot better than having the baths for older people.
Councillor Plenter.
Hello. Obviously, me, I don't agree. I don't endorse the right to buy for a lot of reasons, because it built this type of frontier economy, and it has led to the housing crash we are now. But I noticed that you mentioned it as a major risk determinant in your risk matrix about owning house stock. You say it's a potential direct link. You own these council houses, and then the tenants have the right to buy, and therefore we are ending up. So I just want to ask, I just would like you to confirm if there are any exceptions on the right to buy. So according to my understanding, and I have to read, correct me if I'm wrong, for adapted houses for older people, there is an exception. So it says the right to buy does not arise if the dwelling house is particularly stable, having regard to its location, size, design, heating system, and other features for elderly person, and was left to the tenant or a predecessor entitled of his for occupation by a person who was age 60 or more.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if you consider a possibility to build adapted homes for elderly people that is managed, for example, by another neighborhood council that they are running a housing account, for example, like Broxton. Would you consider that possibility? If
You're absolutely correct. There are some exemptions, and I think the older person and the adapted housing is a good example of that. And if there was a council housing build programme, then I think, yes, that would be a consideration that would be required. But of course, that relies on all the other factors, having the land to be able to do that. And it also relies on then setting up a company to be able to do that, because we don't have our own maintenance and management function. We'd have to get a registered provider to do that. But I think the key point here is that it's having the land to be able to do that. So a better option that we would consider is to utilise the sites that are already coming through, and try to be quite specific about delivering adapted housing, which is on land that's already been designated for residential development. And if there's an overcost with that, as mentioned to Councillor Mallender, we would be able to provide the gap funding for that. Does that answer your question?
would you consider liaising with another neighborhood council that has a housing management account? Would you consider that as an option? Like,
So if you're saying, would we, so that would be quite a complex option, and then it's who's got the land. And for example, if another council had the land and were willing to partner with us, the difficulty then arises in that the social rented housing, people go on the housing register, they go on the register to have housing in Rushcliffe. So unless there's another council that's got land through a developer in Rushcliffe, I can't see how that option would work. I'm sorry if I'm not able to answer that in any more detail.
no, I think I got
Okay.
your lot.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
You sure
No,
can,
it's not a
yes.
follow. It's not a follow. I'm not following up on that, but out of curiosity, when you call the affordable, the social housing, take into account, you mentioned here that there wasn't a pressure before. There wasn't as much pressure, but it's a bigger pressure now because there are more people at risk of homelessness, or because of the COVID and domestic abuse exacerbation, all these social economical factors. You mentioned there are more people, but there is more demand, and there is already a 300, if I understood you, lagging. Taking into account cost of living, can you give a percentage in terms of average wage of the income of a person? What percentage of the income is considered an affordable rent? So if I
understand. Sorry.
Yeah, do you understand?
I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure I know the percentage. I've got 35% somewhere in my head is what's required to be able to spend on rent. That might not be correct, but I don't have I mean, what we can do is look at the income levels in Rushcliffe, and we do that. So when we look at the affordable housing products, or we look at affordable rent, we have got evidence to set out what the income levels are and what is affordable. And very clear in Rushcliffe, a lot of the private rented sector isn't affordable, and the intermediate housing, the government eligibility is that you can earn up to £80,000 to be able to have an affordable housing, something like first homes or shared ownership. So the eligibility criteria for that can be quite a significant salary level, but I don't know the exact percentage, I'm afraid. I could take that back and provide that percentage for you.
I just have a last question, it's very quick. What is the number of empty long-term properties in Rushcliffe? Do we have a register of how many properties there?
We do. That's not my area, but I'm going to revert to Dave Banks on that.
I'm just waiting for that question. So I think, Chair, as you've already pointed out, this was covered quite comprehensively at a recent scrutiny group meeting. The council actually has an affordable, an empty home strategy actually on the website with all the information that you'll need at your fingertips.
Got Councillor Wells next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. If a landowner comes forward with a field and wants 10 houses, but it's in the green belt, would the council help it to deliver affordable housing?
That by and large is a planning policy question, but if you're talking about the circumstances in where strategic housing might get involved in that, that might be to do with exception site development. And that is, I think you're aware, a specific process where we look at housing needs, and that drives looking then at sites within rural communities. But there's quite a lengthy process to that, and that would be sites by exception that are not normally coming through the normal planning route. That probably would be the only time that I can think we would actually be involved in a partnership approach in terms of looking at land that would come outside of the normal planning development route. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yes, it is a very long-winded.
It absolutely is. I certainly agree with you on that.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask a question about the shared ownership? You see, say 75% shared ownership, but when you actually work out the 75%, if it was 100%, it's actually a lot more expensive for that home than to buy it 100% from the developer. So I just wondered why that was, because they're also paying rent on that and a management fee as well for the rent and the insurance and everything. It just doesn't seem great.
I think the point there is that obviously when it's part rent, part buy, the element that you're buying is a lot less than the 100%, and then it's about having to raise a mortgage at a lower level, a lower repayment. So I mean, it's obviously a government model that works, and it enables people to get on the housing ladder that wouldn't ordinarily be able to get a mortgage for 100% of that property. And I think the point that you're making is that when you do consider the rental aspect as well as the mortgage, it can sometimes be the equivalent or sometimes more of buying a property outright 100%. But I think the main barrier to that for some people is actually raising that 100% mortgage. Does that answer your question?
It might answer the question. It's just that when I've been looking at, say, a two-bed house on a new development, it might be, for an example, £290,000.
Mhm.
But the affordable 80% ownership, when you actually work it into 100% ownership, it come out at something like 325,000. And I just don't get why that should be more expensive to if you're buying 100% of the affordable.
I'm not sure I can answer that question. I mean, it is that the model it's a government recognised model. It's in the affordable housing definition, and there are certain percentages on the rent that can be charged, and also on the mortgage element. So it's a formula and a model set by central government, and I can't really say why that's happening or the pros and cons in relation to that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, just before we move on to the last item, second last item, just council planter, just for your information, 900 current empty homes, which we mentioned at the last community scrutiny group, of which 425 have been empty for 6 months or more, to save you having to go onto the internet and look.
Any other questions or comments or anything?
Yeah, just briefly. I was really interested on paragraph 423, where it says the council's local plan part 2 states that in developments of more than 100 dwellings, at least 1% should comply with building regulation requirements. And obviously, Councillor Mellon had touched on this. That sort of property actually, it isn't, when it's adaptable, I mean, it's not just obviously a shower rather than the bathroom. I think, does that include sort of that it could be used with a wheelchair access, so there presumably wider doors and things like that, and higher kitchens or lower kitchens and whatever. Does that actually happen? Do we actually get 1 out of 100 of those properties built?
I'd have to go back to planning policy to confirm the numbers on that, because that isn't just affordable housing, that's 1% of all completions. I think it's fair to say the council would have liked that figure to be higher, but I think through the inspection process, it was reduced down to 1%. But as part of the emerging local plan, there is a proposal to increase that figure. We certainly support a higher percentage because, again, that will help to meet needs of the older population coming through, but also because we've got significant pressures on the disabled facilities grants budget. So we definitely support that coming forward. I would say that you would hope that that has been complied with, but that it might not always be in the rented sector. It might just be 1% of the overall development, which might be owner occupied.
Sorry, just last one. When you say, I mean, I've heard it for many, many years, and developers will say 30% is not viable.
Yes.
And I was interested that you said sometimes you bring people in to check that. What do they base their viability on? I mean, and it just...
Oh, it could be a raft.
Complex.
It is, and that's why we have to have independent consultants, because it's a specialist area. And again, it depends on where the site is, how big the site is. I mean, if you start getting into the bigger strategic sites, it's very complex. And I can assure you, when I go into any negotiations with a developer or any registered provider that has a site that talks about viability, we adopt an open book approach. So we do need that evidence in. I mean, that's usually the first conversation that's tabled. It always is, oh, it's not viable, but we do ensure that that position is corroborated by an independent consultant, and that can be the district valuer that will look at who's got expertise in that area, and they will come back to us with an independent report, usually goes to development control, and then they will assess what is viable on that particular site. And sometimes the bigger picture will be taken into consideration. Quite often affordable housing falls off the table but it could be other contributions that might be reduced to ensure that the site's viable. So it is a difficult one because, of course, we need the sites to come forward, but not at a cost to the residents where we need to be providing that affordable housing too. So I think what I'm trying to say is we're very robust when there's a viability argument.
I've just got one with about the registered providers. I think, did you mention there was like 14 or something around the borough?
That's correct.
I certainly know on the ward that I represent of 3. How do they get chosen and how does that work with the different sites and all the different locations? Because as we know, the main provider we have is Metropolitan Thames Valley, but then there is the other little ones that might have a street or a development that they then manage.
It is a competitive bid process, so the developer will go out to the registered providers. They'll quite often ask us for a list of the registered providers developing or operating in the borough. It's part of the requirement that they do contact the registered providers, and they will ask for tenders for the best, but usually it's the best price that's accepted, but they will ask for tenders. So it's a competitive bid process. So we don't have any say in that, I'm afraid. So we do have a role in terms of ensuring that the registered provider will have a local management presence. So we do ask questions around that, but quite often they're registered providers. I mean, they are regulated independently, and they can be Homes England Strategic Investment.
Thank you very much. Is there any other Councillor Pratt and then more?
Just following on from the chairman's question. Influence does the council have over registered providers where there have been complaints from residents about antisocial behavior from the tenants who live in those registered provider properties? Does council have an influence on how they manage things?
So they can. I mean, we do have annual meetings with the registered providers where we discuss a number of topics, which usually is around choice-based lettings, the housing allocations, but more recently in our discussions we have been ensuring that they are aware that the council does work in partnership with other stakeholders. The police, Dave can probably explain a little bit more, and we've got an ASB working group where the more serious cases can be taken to. So that's got different partners on who can look to address more the more serious and high profile cases. I suppose the lower level cases where they're brought to our attention, we do if that's through a council, we do ask the council to contact the registered provider in the first instance, and if you found that you were not getting a response to that, then I would, through my contacts, try to make contact, but we don't have a specific monitoring function for all the registered providers. We would expect them, as part of their landlord function, to be a responsible landlord and to undertake the normal procedures in dealing with anybody who is experiencing or even a perpetrator of ASB. Dave, did you want to add anything more on?
Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Chair. So yeah, I mean, we don't really have a formal lever we can pull. It's all about trying to work in partnership and certainly make some of the new RPs that are coming into the borough aware of the myriad of different arrangements that we've got in place in the borough to control and social behaviour if and when it does happen, working obviously with the police and working with other colleagues within the council. And then we'll also try and make sure that we bring all those different tools to bear through that antisocial behaviour working group that Donna's already mentioned.
Do you have a follow on
Just follow up on that. Because there are so many registered providers, is it possible for all the councillors to have like a list of the registered providers with the phone numbers and email addresses? Because I have had concerns from residents, and then I have to go on the internet to search for their numbers and who the main contact person is, and it's like a cycle. It's very difficult. So it'd be easier for all councillors to have like a lead person. So for example, it's very easy to get in touch with MTVH because they are the biggest registered provider for Rushcliffe, but it's not so easy for the other smaller registered providers.
I have recently circulated that very list to councillors, but I will, with a list of all the registered providers' contact numbers, I will ensure that's circulated again. There won't, because of the diverse nature of all the different organisations and how they're structured, there won't be a lead person at the majority of those registered providers. It is going through the main number and asking for the relevant section. Of course, with Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, we do have that special relationship with them, and we have strategic development meetings with them. So we do have contacts if you are experiencing difficulties with an MTVH tenant.
Councillor Pellington.
A quick question on equality impact assessment and temporary accommodation. I understand you said that the council is striving to provide accessible accommodation to all its residents with different functional abilities, different perceptual system. I just had a case, and that's what triggered now my question. How lax that becomes when somebody is moved to temporary to transient accommodation, what we call transitory accommodation, between two accommodations. How much is the disability and the requirements of these residents adhered to within between accommodations?
When you make reference to temporary accommodation, are you making reference to when people approach us as homeless and we have a duty to provide the temporary accommodation for them in terms of that transient nature?
I wasn't referring, that can be one area. I wasn't exploring that. I was exploring like there was a person living in particular accommodation. Its house collapsed. He needed to do some repairs on the ceiling. Yes. Therefore, he had to move in another house. I don't know if the terminology I'm using is correct.
Like a decant.
Decant, yes.
Yeah. So a decant, so where that would be the landlord's responsibility. So the registered provider, if it was a Metropolitan Thames Valley property, then they are, and there's property repairs that need to be done, then they are responsible for that temporary decant into another property or into or bed and breakfast until that property is repaired and suitable for the tenant to move back in. So that doesn't come to the council. The only time we will get involved is if a property is considered no longer reasonable to continue to occupy because it's uninhabitable for one reason or another. And that normally happens in the private rented sector and not with the registered providers, because clearly they've got a responsibility.
But do the registered providers, I don't want to mention, probably is that one, do they have a duty, statutory duty to mirror the facilities that the resident has? If he has disabilities, if it's a person with what we term not the normal perceptual system and each particular type of accommodation, in the decant accommodation, do they have an obligation to match these requirements? So it's a house that is not, it's already distressing for a person with different perception to be moved in another house. Don't they have an obligation to mirror the requirements?
Well, they've clearly got duties like we have in terms of meeting the needs of different groups and people with disabilities and adapted housing. I mean, there might be restrictions for doing that in a particular property. Maybe the property doesn't lend itself to be adapted, for example, that would meet those needs. where that's the case, they could apply to go on the council's housing register to move into suitable accommodation. So a registered provider only has the stock that it's got to be able to either move somebody within their own stock or carry out the works to the property to make sure it's adapted to meet those needs. Where they're not able to do that and they haven't got stock, then that tenant can approach us and go on the housing register, and we will then look at alternative accommodation. Does that answer your question?
Sure, yeah, I was more on the decant.
The decant side, we don't get
You don't
involved
get
in that,
involved,
but certainly if a property was uninhabitable and unreasonable to continue to occupy, the landlord has responsibilities in terms of providing suitable accommodation, and it would have a responsibility to decant that person into temporary accommodation until their main residence was brought up to standard.
The problem was that the temporary accommodation was more stressful than the accommodation.
Okay.
That's what I was
And I
getting
understand
alluded
that,
to,
and
yeah.
that's certainly what happens. It mirrors on the homelessness side. Temporary accommodation, unfortunately, is temporary accommodation. It's never going to be suitable for anything long term. But if you've got somebody who's in a wheelchair, for example, that temporary accommodation would need to be accessible for that person in the wheelchair. But you might find situations where a family, depending on the urgency of the situation, might be put in bed and breakfast where it's just 1 or 2 rooms that they're utilising on a temporary basis. And that's when the situation might be more challenging, I would say, for a period of time. But they are temporary for a reason.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Right, thank you very much. There's no more. I think we've kind of just going to the recommendation. I think we have scrutinised the information that's been provided by Donna and officers on the council's current approach to the provision of social housing. I think we can all agree that we've met that recommendation of what's being asked of us tonight. So I'll look to kind of move on to the next item on the agenda, and that. So thank you very much, Donna, for coming and speaking to us tonight. Thank you very much. I'm just a little conscious that we have been here for over 2 hours. Would we like a 5-minute comfort break before we move on to smoke control areas in the borough?
Let's ask a question now. Substitute on this committee, as you know, and other committees I've been on, whereas I think what you've done, you contacted John Donner before the meeting asking various questions, didn't you? I think if people have got a stack of questions, they should do just that as well, because otherwise we run into this evening several hours, well, not several hours, but it could be several hours, but then we finish over here tonight. We're all so same ground. It's pretty clear from the report that Ron has written, there will be questions, and it's up to members of that particular committee to analyse what they want to ask, submit written questions to Donna, in this using John as an example. That doesn't mean they were stopped from asking questions. Of course, it doesn't mean that, but it does allow Donna the time and energy to respond and saves time in this committee as well. Just a suggestion from me, because it works very well in other committees.
Yes, great idea for a 5-minute break just to move about, if nothing else.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
the right one when you finish.
Right, thank you very much, councillors, and I hope everybody's been able to stretch their legs. Just right, moving on to the sixth item, smoke controlled areas in the borough, and I'll pass over to Dave Banks with this one.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep the intro brief, but this is really a great opportunity really for members tonight, the Scrutiny Group, to potentially shape some new control areas for Rushcliffe. The new legislation of the environment tax has provided a really great opportunity to explore how we might want to protect public health. And there are a number of options set out in paragraph 5, which will form the basis of the key areas for the conversation this evening. But I'll now hand you over to Caroline, who'll just walk you through some of the key points from the report.
Thanks, Dave. I thought it'd be useful to give an outline of, obviously smoke control areas have been around for a long time, so that'll be useful to give a little bit of background as to why we're considering them at this particular point in time. So the first smoke control areas were first introduced with the 1956 Clean Air Act, which is quite some time ago now. And that was really as a result of the smogs around at that time. So in Rushcliffe, we've had smoke control orders in place from the 1970s and the 1980s for that area around West Bridgeford, Red Walton, Gamston. That's in the figure in the report. Since then, there have been various amendments to the Clean Air Act, and most recently, with the introduction of the Environment Act 2021, there's been more adjustments to what's been in the Clean Air Act, and I'll come on to those in a little while, what they actually are and what they might mean. So although there has been legislation around to improve air quality for quite a while, and it has worked, there have been significant improvements in air quality. Air quality continues to be the biggest environmental risk to public health, and with children, the elderly, and the already vulnerable being most affected by poor air quality. The quality of the air we breathe affects every single one of us, right from before we're born to our latter years. And poor air quality can lead to lower birth rates in children. It can also lead to reduced lung development in young children. It can reach increased levels of asthma. It can have neurological impacts as well in the development of children. Then as we move through to adulthood, can result in, again, asthma, lung cancers, heart disease, and respiratory issues, and right through to the elderly, where as well as those asthma and heart disease, it can increase the decline of our lung function as we age. And there's also links with dementia and poor air quality as well. So it's across a wide sphere of health issues. Now, these issues can be acute or they can be more chronic, a constant exposure. And then poor air quality is known to impact on health equalities and inequalities. And also then there's the add-on costs on NHS and social care costs as well associated with poor health. Now, in his 2022 report, the Chief Medical Officer, who we all know, Professor Sir Chris Whitty, states that the mortality burden of air pollution in England is between 26,000 and 38,000 a year. So that's the estimate that it was given in 2022. And then in addition to that, it's those that are more vulnerable that suffer the most. So the health effects are quite well known and quite well documented. And then in addition to health effects, there's also effects around that are becoming more being studied more now, impacts on biodiversity and our natural environment, for example. So in relation to the health effects, the strongest evidence for effects on health is associated with fine particulate matter. Now, particulate matter in air is anything that's not a gas. And fine particulate matter is what we would refer to as PM 2.5, so 2.5 microns. It's fine, and it's known as fine particulate matter. And the reason, linking back to smoke control areas, is that in 2021, domestic combustion contributed approximately 27% of emissions of PM 2.5. So it's not an insignificant contribution in terms of emissions. Now, with many of their air pollutants over time in the decades we've been studying them, there's been a decline in emissions, and some have dropped really significantly, for example, like sulfur dioxide, due to bans on certain sale of certain types of fuel. However, in the last decade or so, improvements in PM2.5 emissions have pretty much stalled. So then there's been an emphasis more to kind of kickstart that and see how we can further reduce and work on a further decline on PM2.5. And that has resulted in some of the things we've seen in the Environment Act and in the England Clean Air Strategy. Now, the Government Clean Air Strategy, the Central Government Clean Air Strategy, sets out the strategic framework in which it thinks local authorities should work to improve air quality and to meet local objectives, but also to contribute to the national picture as well. Because as you'll appreciate, things like PM2.5, it's not just an issue where it's produced, it's going to disperse in the air and be a national and an international issue as well. So it recognises in the Clean Air Strategy that there are sources of PM2.5 that local authorities can and do have control over. And that's where it links back to smoke control areas and encourages local authorities, tells local authorities we should keep the boundaries of our smoke control areas under review, especially if development has taken place outside of the boundaries that we currently have for our smoke control areas. And as a local authority, we should consider whether or not it's beneficial to declare new smoke control areas and indeed enforce the restrictions that already exist within existing smoke control areas. Now, more locally, that's the England Air Quality Strategy that was produced last year. More locally, as Rushcliffe, we're signed up to the Nottinghamshire and Nottingham Air Quality Strategy, and the vision for that is to ensure that all Nottinghamshire residents have clean air that allows them to lead healthy and fulfilling lives. Likewise, in our own corporate strategy, we talk about improving air quality. There's links also with our own, the Rushcliffe Air Quality Action Plan, where we also talk about improving air quality and through measures including domestic burning. So that's a little bit of the background as to why we're considering it again now, in that there's been a push more recently for PM2.5. So in terms of what a smoke control area is, it's an area that has been declared by the local authority as a smoke control area. And within that area, certain rules apply. And those are things like you cannot release smoke from a chimney, and you can only burn authorised fuel if you're using a DEFRA approved or exempt appliance. Now, and DEFRA do recognise this, there's a lot of confusion around the terminology, because you may have seen terminology approved appliances, exempt appliances, unauthorised fuels, controlled fuels, and there is that recognition that sometimes guidance hasn't always been consistent. But exempt appliances are DEFRA exempt appliances, and those are appliances that have been tested to a certain degree to monitor the emissions they release. And then if they meet those certain standards, they can be defined as DEFRA exempt appliances for the fuels that they've been tested for. So not for everything, but for the fuels that have been tested for. And on the DEFRA website, there's a huge, big, long list of different products and different versions of different manufacturers and different products that are exempt for certain types of fuel. Now, in terms of you can only burn authorised fuels unless you're using an exempt appliance. Now, an unauthorised fuel, we talk about a controlled fuel, and there are those are things that aren't on the DEFRA list of authorised fuels, and that would include things like wood, like logs that you buy. They're what we've as an unauthorised or a controlled fuel. Now, there is a massive list, again, in the DEFRA website of authorised fuels, different types, different manufacturers produce different types of fuel. So there is a link, the idea being that if you are using the right type of appliance, with the right type of fuel, smoke emissions should be significantly lower or non-existent. So in terms of the rules that apply around smoke emissions relate to chimneys in buildings. So that will be in houses. It also talks about chimneys of furnaces for any fixed boiler or industrial plant. And under the Environment Act, there is the opportunity to include permanent moored vessels within the consideration of a smoke control area. Previously, those were exempt, but now there's been a push to include within any smoke control area provisions. A building, in terms of the chimney of a building is something with walls and a roof. So if you've got something in your summer house, for example, that would fall on in the rules. But if you're burning in a barbecue in your back garden, that would fall outside the rules, or these particular rules, shall we say, these particular rules around a smoke control area. It is well recognised that awareness of smoke control areas is very low among the general population. It's one of those questions that you've probably been asked when you bought a house. You know, does it lie within a smoke control area? Dutifully gone and found out, and then nobody ever thinks about it again. And there is a big push to increase awareness. And that's one of the things we'd be looking to do as well, to raise awareness among our residents as well about, if you are in a smoke control area, the things that you should and shouldn't be doing. Now, previously the offences existed as well with releasing smoke from a chimney. However, it was really difficult to enforce. It was a criminal offence, and it was very, very difficult to enforce, which was one of the reasons that there was little enforcement in any of the smoke control areas in the country. And to try and address that under the Environment Act, there has been a move to allow local authorities to introduce their own policies within their own local authority area, to introduce a civil financial penalty scheme for release of smoke emissions from a chimney within a smoke control area. So the idea is that the enforcement is much more proportionate, and it's a local, every local authority will have their own policy around that enforcement. And it's a staged process as well within that process. DEFRA recommend in the first instance, if we have a policy in place and a local authority gets a complaint of a smoke emission, the best thing to do probably is to serve what's called an improvement notice, which is really a warning letter to say, look, we've had this reported to us on about this time and this date, and then to furnish the person with information and advice about how they can prevent this happening again. And that would be obviously increasing awareness around that. And then we would suggest that's always the initial step, that information and education, increasing awareness. And then should that not do the trick, the next stage in the process would be a notice of intent to say we intend to issue you with a financial penalty. And that financial penalty can range between £175 and £300. The local authority can set their own financial penalty, so whether or not it would be the lower end for a first offence with an increased sliding scale for future offences or repeat offences, it's entirely up to each local authority to do that within their own policy. At that time, a responsible person receiving a notice of intent has the right to object. They might say, well, it wasn't, I'm not the responsible person, it wasn't me. There is the right to object at that stage. However, if there are no objections or we don't consider the objections to be valid, then we have the right to serve the final notice and actually issue somebody with a financial penalty for the offence of releasing smoke from a chimney within a smoke control area. So that gets you, well, what smoke would constitute smoke from a chimney in a smoke control area? That is the question again for every local authority. Again, it would be proportionate. Most people will know if you have an open fire or you have a log burner or any type of appliance like that, when you start it up and you light it, there will be some smoke emission. And this is where we would set our own policy and be proportionate in our approach. We recognise onto the flue is hot, you will get some smoke emission. And again, when you refuel, you might also get a little bit of emission then when you're loading more fuel into the fire. And that would be taken, that's something that officers would, there is an element of discretion in setting the policy. Therefore, I'm quite keen to say it's up to every local authority to set it their own way, to deal with their own local needs and their own local authority area. So again, so that's the issue around smoke emissions, very briefly. Within a smoke control area as well, it's also illegal to sell or buy unauthorised fuel for use in the smoke control area. So you shouldn't be buying it and you shouldn't be selling it. Now, unless it's for use in a DEFRA approved or an exempt appliance. So any retailer who's selling fuel should have a signage up to say, this is not for use in a smoke control area unless you're using a DEFRA exempt appliance. Our colleagues in trading standards will be dealing with the retail sale of fuels within and outside of smoke control areas as well. There were regulations brought in last year around the supply and sale of fuels. Some of you may know it's no longer legal to sell traditional house coal for domestic use. And there are more certification around wood and the amount of moisture that should be in wood that's being sold. So there are other measures that way to try and improve, to try and make air quality better. Statutory nuisance provisions still apply within a smoke control area, which is the way we deal with other issues like things that wouldn't fall within the definition of a chimney from a building, so bonfires, those sorts of things would also apply to domestic premises and sale or smoke emissions from domestic premises. So we would still have those measures available. So we would have the civil penalty scheme to deal with smoke emissions, and we would also have still the statutory nuisance provisions as well. So in our so it's just really another tool for us from that side of it. So in the paper we've given you four options as to what we consider possible options within the borough. Now, officer recommendation is for option D, to revoke the existing smoke control orders and declare a new smoke control order to cover the whole of the borough. There is a prescribed process for revocation of smoke control orders and for declaration of new ones, and that declaration process includes public consultation as well. So option D, in our view, will maximise public health benefits and will also ultimately improve public health outcomes for all of the residents across the borough. Poor air quality affects children, the elderly and the vulnerable most, and they will be living in locations all across the borough. So that's one of the reasons why we, consider that option D to be the best option. But on the other hand, option D may have an impact on some of our existing residents by virtue of the type of appliance they've got and the need to buy appropriate fuel to burn in those appliances. So there may well be an impact depending on what people currently do and currently have to heat their homes. I'm happy to take any questions. Sorry, it was a very brief one. I know you've been here a long time, so it's like
I'll open it up to full councillor Billing.
I will express a minor interest in that I have a wood burning stove that we hardly ever use. The house is so well insulated, we don't need to. So my question is, I appreciate the council can't give money for upgrades of stoves, etc. and whatever, but what would the process be for someone like myself or whoever has a stove to find out whether the stove we have can actually be used? Because what I don't want to do is light it up this winter if this new control zone comes in and find them in breach.
I would suggest the best thing to do first is you'll have a make on your stove and a model number. You might even have the original documentation. If you search that DEFRA list on the DEFRA website, which I can provide you with, I think there might even be a link in the document for it, then you'll be able to work out hopefully whether or not it is. If not, it may well be contact the manufacturer or even who you bought it from if it was a relatively recent one, and they may be able to tell, but it should be on that DEFRA list. There are a lot on the DEFRA list, and a lot of them are individual model numbers, so sometimes they don't vary greatly between appliances, so you might just want to check that you've got the right one.
How many pages have you done, Richard?
Like, honestly, the little scroll bar has just gone
Yeah.
down to a tiny, tiny
Yeah.
dot about that size on the screen. There's hundreds of them.
Have you got anything more?
You can search alphabetically and by number and model number and everything, so it's not that it's not that onerous, hopefully.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously, paragraph 4.21, I think, is the key one for this evening, which is really just trying to get a steer from councillors before we go out to public consultation, is what your view is in terms of those 4 different options. Paragraph 5 does cover some of the risks that are associated with each one of those. But as Caroline said, this is really about ensuring potentially equity in terms of public health measures across the borough. So rather than perhaps dropping into the detail of which appliance might be illegal or not, I think it's really important we look at that bigger picture and say, actually, what is the best process, if you like, or option that we as members want to give a steer on for that public consultation exercise.
Councillor Wells, you had your hand up for next.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit, I have a log burner. I have the chimney swept every year, and I get a certificate to say that I get it swept. But it'd be interesting if the council produces a document to say which is legal fuel and which isn't to burn.
I think that was answered on the DEFRA website.
Well,
That's
okay.
where the reference is. So
I have it because I have a lung disease, and I find in winter the log burner is the only thing to keep me warm. Central heating doesn't do it, and nor does electric fire. The heat from a log burner is totally different, and that's the only thing that keeps me warm. So yes, expand the smokeless zone, but you've got to take in people like myself with a medical condition, and I can prove it.
but I think it's not kind of looking at banning those kind of things. There is stuff that is kind of approved appliances that can be used, but fuel, it's kind of that area where those don't fall into and used, rather than ones that aren't DEFRA listed that can be used. The same with the fuels, which I'm sure the fuel list might be even longer than the appliance one. Or is it? So going to my list, Councillor Pratt, you then.
Just a very quick question. Does it impact bonfire nights?
This particular piece of legislation and smoke control area that smoke wouldn't be coming out of a chimney. There are other measures we can deal where, which there would be other things to worry about. There are other nuisance provisions would still apply for things like that, yeah. But on the issue about the log burn as well, the air quality strategy for England, it does quite clearly state in there that government is not seeking to ban domestic burning. It recognises that in certain parts of the country, that is people's primary source of heating, cooking, so that, it does, yeah. It's not a ban as such.
Councillor Mallender, yeah.
Yeah, lots of people bought them, but I think most people barely use them. That's the thing. Yeah, the list of actually of fuels is quite a bit shorter than the list of stoves that are usable, simply because they've included every single model within a particular range. So you just scroll through it. The air quality is, an issue to certainly that we need to look at. It's nowhere near as bad as 1952, which was a little better mental calculation. I realised that my mum was a 19-year-old student in London, and she has told me about what it was like and how you could not see the other side of the road. The air was so polluted at that time. on what we've got before us as the proposals, I do think we need to look at increasing the area, and I would say potentially to include the entire borough. It was obviously, when this was put in place, the urban area that it was looking at there was primarily West Bridgeford. It didn't, and West Bridgeford has grown a lot since then. We've got a lot of new housing, probably, you know, and that will include some housing now that just doesn't have chimneys, so it probably wouldn't be applicable to them anyway. But there is a thing about being fair in how we address the issue, and probably to sort of spread it and have it as a borough-wide one would probably make sense as well. And then that way we don't have to sort of encapsulate a bit for Copgrave, a bit for Rushcliffe-on-Trent, a bit for somewhere else as well. But I'm open to hearing what other councils' views are on this.
Councillor Plant, you're next.
Thank you. Yes, I would certainly agree with option D. But just for the clarity, so Dave, if the committee, that's just what I'm saying at the moment, agree, say option D, that goes out to consultation, and along with the consultation, is there, I mean, there is a lot of information that you've just given us, Caroline. I mean, people don't want all of that, so it's quite clear what we communicate to them. And then obviously in the consultation at the same time, so we have to be quite clear on that. And to be fair, there's not a great record of a response to consultations. So we just go with what comes back and it comes.
Thank you, Councillor Plant. So yeah, tonight really is just about, as part of our preliminary consultation, if you like, is getting that steer from Community Scrutiny Group prior to us going out to a wider public consultation. There are some other local authorities in Nottinghamshire also going out to consultation as well in a similar fashion. They're going out with a recommendation, actually, interestingly, for district-wide schemes. So tonight is about getting that steer from yourself, and we can include reference in the public consultation what your suggestion is, but clearly we want to get the richness of the full consultation, share that obviously and digest that before we'd make any recommendations back to Cabinet, who of course are the decision-making body.
So just again, so what would the timeline be briefly for that?
Well, we'd probably look to follow up the public consultation towards the end of this year, with a view to bringing back a proposal to Cabinet early in the new year.
I just wanted to ask around with the trade person, just kind of with how that is with the areas, and of course a borough-wide one is that it's easy because it's just borough wide, but how kind of with the other options would it manage for if you've got a trade person who is in the borough outside and selling kind of products and stuff like that? How is that managed, and selling it to somebody that then is listed in an area? How would that with the fuels and all that, how would it work with the ins and outs of it all? Because I'm thinking as well that you could get outside of the borough kind of coming in, and where's the onus on making sure that somebody knows what they're buying? I'm trying to think of it like we have with fly tipping, for instance, in the borough, where there's the obligation on the person who's kind of using a registered company to dispose of their waste, that it's then on the company if they fly tip it, or person, but then, so it's just kind of how then these options would with the trade.
Trading standards will deal a lot with the retail and supply, but if a person is selling for a customer to come in and take away fuel, then they need signage up. If a person is selling and supplying fuel, a controlled fuel like wood, then it is an offence for them to supply that in a smoke control area unless they believe or have reasonable grounds to believe that it's for use in a DEFRA exempt appliance. So there the onus is on the them to ask the question and the person who they're supplying to confirm that they have that in place. As with like the investigation of any smoke emissions, I'm sure trading standards would work on a kind of intelligence-led basis as well, because we could have suppliers in the borough who are supplying elsewhere, you know, around about that where there might not be a smoke control area. So, you know, it would be a combination of those two things, but there is a particular offence for supplying within like a controlled fuel within a smoke control area without, you know, without basically checking if you know, if it's to be used in a DEFRA exempt appliance.
We're just getting that understanding of that they have to kind of have that log and ask the question on and that to with the person.
I believe
who's
as
buying.
well, trading standards we're kind of liaising with trading standards on these issues, that they will be, you know, there's a limited number of suppliers around the borough and around Nottinghamshire, and you know, they will be liaising with all those to make it absolutely clear, because the rules, some of the rules that have changed recently about the supply of fuels apply both inside smoke control areas and outside of smoke control areas. So you know, that will be part of the process they go through, I believe.
And just go with the existing area, and then with expanding, and of course being a bigger area, there'd be more kind of occasions where there's being reporting. Apologies if it was. How many since it's been set up? Kind of we've watched detailed of the area in option A. Has there been with kind of people reporting or occasions that kind of possible breaches of the controlled area?
Well, since it was set up, these smoke control orders are in place since the night, some of them in the 1970s and the 1980s. I'm not entirely sure how many, but at that time, there was a limit to what could be done when we got complaints about smoke emissions. What I've noticed in recent years, over the last couple of years, is there must be an increased awareness within the public general population, because we are getting an increase in the number of smoke complaints and complaints about emissions. I don't have the exact numbers to hand, but we are, you know, we see an increase about domestic burning and other types of burning as well. But yeah, there is a general, and I think that comes with an increased awareness. And whenever these things are reported in the press, because there's been quite extensive reporting around domestic burning, both the impact on outdoor air quality, but also the impact on indoor air quality as well if you're burning inappropriate fuels. And that's something that's kind of at an earlier stage than the outdoor air quality, but often we'll see a resulting increase in smoke complaints after those things have been in the press.
Just a quick way. Of course, I think we should go for D++, because pulmonary fibrosis, decreasing lung capacity, risk of lung cancer, asthma, COPD. To me, the right to clean air and to health is a inalienable human right. So there isn't any parameterization on that. I think the important thing as well during the consultation is to be deliberative and have a health campaign, a public health campaign, because that's important, because there is a misconception. I was in Corfu and my family still has a wooden stove, and they consider it aesthetically pleasant, they consider a focal point for socialization, and they totally ignore that they are poisoning their kids and the intensity of the pollution. And I think another thing that we should consider as well during the public health information, which is very important, because people think it's CO2 neutral. They conflate woods with absorbing CO2, and they think that's a great way of being neutral. The other thing is consumer information as well, clear labeling, because a lot of these products, they are using oxymorons and antithetical terms. So we have these eco-design stoves, which they are equally polluted, they are as pollutant as HGV and trucks. So this is another important fact to emphasize. I'll stop here.
Unless there's any council wanting to discuss the
One very quick question. If we go for option D, which I have, even with a stove, no problem with, I presume there will be a time before it comes in. What do you envisage will be the issue, or what would we do about people like myself who have a stock of wood that has been laid down for 5 years and is absolutely bone dry? Is there time for people to get rid of it? Because otherwise there's going to be a whole load of stuff just dumped.
You can put an FP bonfire.
Local scouts will love it, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, that's an option for us to take on board when we present any final report to Cabinet, is to decide when we should start to enforce the new requirements, once we decide obviously what the scope and the geographical coverage is. So that will be an important consideration which Cabinet will ultimately make a decision upon.
So just going on to the recommendations, is to consider the options, which I think we have, is to indicate a preferred option, enabling public consultation to take place, and then C is to recommend its preferred option to Cabinet for adoption. So generally what I've heard from councillors is option D. From everywhere, I haven't heard anybody say about one of the other options. So unless I won't kind of go through all the options one by one, but we should just kind of have a show of hands for option D, because that's kind of been the most that I've heard. Yeah, so that's unanimous, right? So if we're kind of content, I think we've met those recommendations for this report. Thank you very much. Thank you, Carl, for coming and presenting and answering all our questions on this. Thank you very much. Welcome for the small last one, or if you'd like to go. Right, moving on to item 7. The final item on tonight's agenda is just to go through the work programme for the rest of this year. So we've got on the 18th of January, which is our next, which is the next meeting, is flight paths. 21st of March is streetwise insourcing, and then the carbon management plan comes back to this committee as it does yearly. And then sometime in June, because of course the calendar for that council year would be approved at full council, is the use of community facilities. So unless we've got any questions or anything on that, I propose that we accept that work programme. But of course, as everything, it can change once it goes back to COG and more scrutiny items come back, like today with what was asked of us to consider. But as it stands, that's what we've been presented of what we've got on the programme. So I could have a show of hands to accept that, please, unless there's any questions. Thank you very much. Well, you kind of saying what your regular the people you're subbing for have got to consider. Right, so I'll close the meeting and thank you everybody for coming, and thank you for those who've come and substituted tonight as well. Thank you very much.